My name is Michelle Johnston. I'm the Senior Manager of Strategic Development at Production Solutions, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about direct mail. We're going to look at what's trending in direct mail and some cost-saving ideas at the end. So I'm super excited to share this with you today. We are recording this, and after the recording is over, we'll send out a copy of the recording as well as the slides from today, so you'll have a chance to look at those in your own time. If you have any questions, if you'll please add them to the Q&A box, and we'll take those at the end of the webinar. If for some reason we run out of time, then I'll follow up individually with those of you who had questions we didn't get to. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to settle in. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. So my job at Production Solutions is largely to keep track of what's happening in the mail, both amongst our clients and then also with our suppliers and also for non-clients in the direct mail space. I also keep a close look on what's happening in commercial mail, because what's happening in commercial mail is going to eventually make its way to nonprofit mail. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping track of what's happening now and what's coming. We're going to look at 4 main topics today. So we're going to look at what's happening in nonprofit direct mail, which is most likely where most of you are. We're going to look at what's happening in commercial mail that I think nonprofits should be aware of. We're going to look at a couple of emerging technologies in the mail, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some cost-saving tips and tricks. So hopefully you'll find something for inspiration today. We are going to move through this fairly quickly. These aren't really a deep dive into these topics, but more an overview of what's happening. Again, feel free to use the Q&A box. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the end. So what's happening in nonprofit direct mail? Oh, my slides are going everywhere. So nonprofit direct mail, I think the last year has been very strange for nonprofits. Obviously, the whole world has been in turmoil, and we saw a lot of nonprofits continue to mail, but they maybe weren't quite as adventurous in their testing. They were using their tried and true packages more often than not. So a couple of the trends that we saw. The first is, of course, COVID messaging. I don't think we can talk about the last year without touching on how people have talked about COVID. So the first thing we saw very early in the pandemic is that we saw a lot of people adding pieces to existing mailings. So much like the buck slips and the slip note that you see here, there was an immediate kind of call to action sent through these extra inserts. So here we have a couple. The first one is from Covenant House. It's actually in a current mailing. They're still using this buck slip, but it's very typical of what we saw. Usually bright canary yellow with just a simple black print, and it talked about the impact of COVID on that nonprofit and the community that they serve. Then below that, we had a buck slip from Disabled Veterans National Foundation that talked about, this is a call to action. Now is the time to act. And then a lift note, which was more like, we're all in this together. And I know it's been a lot right now, but we can band together as a community to get through this. And now I think what we're seeing is more COVID being part of the messaging. So I pulled a couple of examples, and you'll notice some real similarities in how people are talking about COVID. This is really for nonprofits that are largely not affected by the direct kind of medical implications of COVID, but instead are just talking about the world that we live in right now. So we have an envelope that talks about turbulent times, and we're in this together. Our program has been more than tripled since the COVID-19 crisis. The new challenges presented by the COVID-19 crisis. We're responding to the ever increasing demands. The pandemic continues to challenge all us. Those are the ways we're seeing COVID in the copy right now. It's really more of an acknowledgement that this is the way things are right now. And we're not seeing quite as much specific COVID messaging unless it's a nonprofit that's very, very specific to what's happening in the crisis. The next thing I wanted to touch on was donor advised funds. So I've been calling this the biggest 3 words in fundraising. And I think over the last 2 years, I've probably sat in on 8 or 9 different webinars, mostly with Jack Doyle from Emergent talking about donor advised funds. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're seeing them in mail specifically. So the first way is through buck slips, which I feel like is a really popular way to get new ideas out. A lot of the buck slips seem to be focused on informing donors that this is a way that they can give. So rather than it being super specific about their particular program, it's really, what is a donor advised fund? How does this play into my fundraising and into my giving? And then in this case, they offered kind of a phone number like, hey, if you'd like to know more, we'd love to talk to you about it. The most popular way we see it mentioned is on the back of a reply slip. So here we have a couple of examples. One talks about, up at the top left, we have Human Rights Watch that talks about you can make a greater impact through a donor advised fund. Then we have, do you have a donor advised fund? Next to that, below it, it's listed as one of the additional ways that you can give. And then at the bottom, we have the Humane Society one. And I want to point this one out specifically because one thing that Jack has talked a lot about in his webinars is the information that donors will need to make a donor advised fund gift. And that is the tax ID number and the legal name of your organization. And so you'll see this wording from the Humane Society really lays that out very clearly. Here's what you need if you want to find us through your donor advised fund. And then the other way we're seeing it in the mail is we're finally starting to see people actually send mail to donor advised fund donors. So the letter on the left was a year-end giving appeal. And what's great about this one is they use the exact same copy they use for their high dollar donors, but they took out all the references to return the reply, because with DAF donors, you don't need a reply or a reply envelope. And so they were able to use the exact same copy and just kind of take out the specific references to how to send your gift in. And then next to that, also from NPF, we have a survey, and you can see they've included donor advised funds as an option in their survey. Is this something that you're interested in? Are you interested in giving to us through a donor advised fund? And I would say for mid-level and high dollar donors, I think this was a planned giving survey. This could be a really good way to identify those donors that you might be able to get DAF donations from. All right, QR codes. I'm sorry. QR codes are something that are emerging again in mail. We saw them a few years ago, but you had to have a special app on your phone to actually read them. And now that smartphones have made that much easier, and I think the pandemic has opened people up to using them a lot more. Restaurants are using them in place of menus. It's made people who've probably never thought about a QR code look at them differently. I think we're starting to see them in the mail again. And so here's a couple of them. The top one is amongst different ways to give. So if you want to get your donation to us faster, you can go online, you can use this QR code and do it through your phone, or you can give us a call. Next to that, we have a couple of letters where they've added a QR code to the back of the letter. This is a really interesting placement because usually the PS of the letter is where we start to see the reinforcement of giving the gift. Don't forget to return your reply. We would love to hear from you. That's usually at the tail end of a letter, if not the PS. And so putting a QR code there at the end can spur a donor who has the piece in hand to go ahead and make that donation right then and there. And then the one that says I gave online, this is actually a church giving. So this is for tithing. And I thought it was really interesting, potentially for when people start being in person again. So rather than giving a check while you're sitting in church, they had an option with a card where you could say, I gave online, and use a QR code to do it right away. So think about this in terms of in-person events, canvassing. This could be a great way to kind of get that option in front of people right away. And then these are both from commercial, but I wanted to point them out in terms of how nonprofits could use them. So the first one on the left is a postcard, and they used a QR code as a, here's how you can connect to us fast. QR codes are a great thing to include in your postcards because it's an immediate response. They have the postcard in hand, they grab their phone, and they can take care of everything right at once. And from a printing standpoint, it doesn't cost you anything, right? It's a one color, you're already printing on it. So including a QR code on your postcards, especially if it's something that you're giving them a web address anyway, can help push donations a little faster. And at the very least could push engagement a little faster. And then the one next to it is from AAA, and this is an application for life insurance. But imagine this as a survey. So if you're doing a survey on paper, consider adding a QR code to your survey so that they fill out faster, and then the end of it, they would be prompted to give a gift. Along with that, we're also seeing a push to online. I think we've seen this for a long time, but I think how we're seeing it is starting to expand. So this is just a couple of examples. So the most common would be just to add a URL where people can go and donate based on that particular campaign. In the middle, we have one where they promoted the fact that, hey, did you know we're on Amazon Smile? This is another way you can donate to us. And then they also took a moment to talk about what they were doing on Facebook. So this is a great way to kind of push connection between your donors and the organization by using your social media. So if they're not already connected to you, they know, hey, I can go find them on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, and that's another kind of connection point. Similarly, the one on the right talks about free resources that are available online, as well as here's how you can find us in social media. And we would love to talk to you. You can subscribe to our newsletter, you can talk to other members, you can talk to us directly. Impact statements are something we see a lot of in nonprofit fundraising. Donors love to hear how their money is being used. And I wanted to show just a few examples of some of the ones we've seen. So first we have a very simple year in review. This is from Compassion and Choices, I believe. And it really focuses in on the numbers. So you'll notice the numbers are large font, they're very prominent, and they're laid out in such a way that the donor's eye kind of, goes around the page. Next to that, that's actually a commercial sample from Amex, but it uses the same kind of idea, this sort of combination of large numbers and some images to kind of draw the reader's attention from the top to the bottom. Next to that, we have one from Children's Defense Fund, and this is an interesting one. It's a lot of text, and it's a lot of accomplishments. This is also a year end, I believe. But what I liked about it was that they broke everything down into sections. So if you have, it could be broken down into parts of the world you work in, parts of the country that you work in. It could be broken down into different programs, which is a little bit how they did it. There's a section on their activism and a section on their schools. And so there's this sort of breakdown of here's all the accomplishments within certain sections. And then we move on to a couple that are a little simpler. So these are, the first one on the left, very graphic. The pictures really are taking the place of those large numbers. This is from Doctors Without Borders, and it focuses on, like, here's the key ingredients of our program and really how the numbers play into those key ingredients. Next to it is Salvation Army, and this is actually the back of a letter. So you don't have to have a completely new insert. I think we see this a lot where the impact statements are just part of another piece of the mailing. This is something you could do on a really regular basis, include it in some piece of real estate in your mailing that, that maybe gets underused, like the back of a letter. And then finally, these really focus on telling smaller stories through impact statements. And the first two really focus on, here's the parts of the world that we work in. Now, the reason I like these and wanted to point them out is I see this a lot with international mailings. So the first is, you know, here's 5 key areas in the world that we're working, and here's some statistic about what we've done. Next to that, they take the same idea. Here's 4 areas in the world that we're working, but they break it down to an individual story about each of those areas. So it's telling a larger story, but it's really focusing in and saying, you know, because of you, we were able to do this here. And then finally, the heifer example, this is an insert that's used still in a control package. And it really takes that one step further, and it says, your donation of this, a single cow, can multiply into all these things for a family that we're helping. So it seems like a very small impact. It's not the big numbers that you see in the others, but it's still showing that this gift makes a big difference. We've seen a lot of things around postage in the last couple of years. And so I wanted to point out a couple of them. The first is this one, and I've just called it excess stamps. So these are stamps that appear to not be needed. So we have 2 examples of BREs where 1-cent stamps have been added to the BREs. And then an outer envelope where 1-cent stamps have been added, and then a pre-cancellation postmark was used. So essentially, that one is more like using a meter, where the 5 cents that you're seeing on the envelope is basically paying the same that you would buy a nonprofit stamp for. And then the pre-cancellation tells the post office that you've actually paid the balance of the postage. So it's a great way to get attention in the mail, and I think we're seeing it a lot more. The other thing that we're seeing now is that sort of same idea has been translated into these faux stamps. So most of these have been on REs, and not all have been BREs, but I would say probably most of them. The faux stamps are largely pre-printed on the envelope, but some of them are actually stickers that are stuck and affixed to the RE. I have yet to see any results as to how this really does, but we know that we're seeing a lot of it, and we're getting requests all the time from clients about what are the rules around it, where can we put it, how does it work? And then this one kind of plays into that postage idea, and I have been calling this peekaboo windows. So these are windows specifically used to show you that there is postage inside. So the yellow one, the Captain John James one, this is actually a political mailing, and I thought it was interesting. So it basically shows you that there's a BRE inside, and they've put 2 stamps on it, and they're showing it through a standard left window envelope, and then they've personalized the envelope. So instead of using the window, they've personalized the envelope and used the window to show the postage inside. And there's a couple of other variations here. There's one where the postage has been paper clipped to an RE. That one, in fact, is not a BRE. It's not a postage paid reply envelope. It is, in fact, got 12 stamps inside of it, 12 1-cent stamps inside of it, and little blocks to show how to lay out the stamps on the RE to send it back. And then the one with the back window. So this is a window you might typically use to show that you have address labels inside, or some sort of premium, or maybe some sort of digitally printed personalization. And instead it's being used to show that there is a postage paid envelope inside. Informed delivery. We are using this a ton at Production Solutions. We have a lot of clients who are now doing it year round. What's great about informed delivery is that, at least for now, through the post office, it's a free service. And it garners visibility. We are starting to hear from clients that they're starting to actually get donations through it. I don't know that it's a major moneymaker for anybody, but what it does is it really pushes visibility, brand awareness. It's a great way to get in front of your donors and let them know that something's coming. And the numbers keep going up. So we're seeing the number of click-throughs go up, the number of clients using it go up, the number of people using informed delivery keeps going up. So if you're not trying it, it's really worth taking a look at, even if you're doing it outside the postal promotion, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is two examples. These are actually from MyMail. The first one shows the option where you can use just the normal black and white scan of your envelope, as well as the small ride-along image. That's the one they would actually click on to give through to your donation page. And then the one next to it, which shows sort of a color representation of the envelope. You'll notice it doesn't have the address block on it. It's just the image from the envelope. And then the color ride-along image. Labels are still king, like them or not. People are still sending address labels. And I wanted to show a couple of variations we've seen. I think we're seeing more and more that people are trying to use their address labels to the best of their ability and get as much out of them as possible. Even as people kind of talk about, are we really still sending address labels? So from left to right, we've got a couple of examples. On the left, this is from restless leg syndrome. And they used those large stickers with the landscapes on them to do kind of a push to web. So each sticker kind of says, you know, this is available on our website to find out more about restless leg syndrome, to help with millions of those that are suffering, know the 7 signs. So they've taken this opportunity to say, we have this information on our website, and we're going to use some of these stickers to kind of guide people to that information. Then we have an integrated label form. So if you've never used one before, it basically has a label panel that's integrated into a letter form. So you can see on this one, they've packed a lot into this sheet. At the top, we have a Perfect member card. Then we have a back-end premium offer. Then we have a petition. And then we have the actual address labels. So there's lots of versions you can use those panels. You can have your letter in here, your reply. You can use those panels in whatever makes the most sense in your mailing, but really figure out, and I think what we're seeing is, what can I use this form for besides just address labels? Next to it, we have what's probably one of the more popular uses at the holidays, which is that some of the address labels become gift tags. And then they've also included the small round ones, which can be used as envelope seals. And then a couple of smaller format ones. So again, one that's address labels and envelope seals, or just stickers. And then below it, we have some gift tags that are non-holiday gift tags. So these could be sent any time of the year, used for birthdays, graduations, anniversaries. They don't have to be done just at the holidays, and they don't have to be just with holiday messaging. And then we have a few additional label forms. So the one at the top left is very focused on unusual shaped labels. That's a quick way to kind of gain someone's attention, especially if you get lots of labels. Try some labels that aren't shaped like everything else. Next to that is one that incorporates both stickers and address labels, and then a bumper sticker at the top. And then along the bottom, the long thin strips, those are actually envelope wraps. So you would put the address label in the top left corner and then wrap the sticker around the back. So there's a message on the front and the back of your envelope. The one in the middle incorporates address labels and a decal like you might put on your car window. And then again, a smaller format of envelope seals or stickers and address labels. Notepads are another popular premium still. And so, but what we're seeing is, again, just like the labels, people are using them for more things than they have in the past. So we have sort of, again, from left to right, we have the front page can be used as a lift note or information you might put on a buck slip. So the Doctors Without Borders kind of has a little blurb that relates back to what the campaign was. Which was about writing your story. We can rewrite the story of malnutrition. So they use the front page of the notepad to kind of reinforce that messaging. Next to that, this is a Heifer International list that basically says, you know, the same symbolic gifts that they might use in their mailing. $20 is going to buy you a flock of chicks. $25 is going to buy you a goat, whatever that ask is. And what's interesting about this one is it doesn't just say it's going to get you this. So for instance, the first one says $20 is a flock of chicks. And with each of those, they will lay 200 eggs that are going to feed a family. So they're kind of, again, that impact statement, getting back to the crux of why people give. We have a notepad that has coloring. So coloring has been really popular probably the last 5 or 6 years with adults. This is a quick way to do that. You can print in one color and they can color whatever color they like. Personalized notepads, we still see a ton of those. Shopping list, the one on the far right is they took the first 2 pages and they put recipes on it. And then along the bottom, there's some other ideas we've seen incorporated into notepads. So the first is ASPCA did one with a member card that perfed out of the backer on the notepad. It's the first time I've ever seen that one. Wounded Warrior Project actually puts a reply both at the front of a notepad and then also as the last page of the notepad. So you are prompted to give a gift both when you start the notepad and when you finish it. I thought that was an interesting take on it. And then finally, the last one is actually 2 notepads that are perfed together. So it's a kind of 2-in-1 premium. The other premium trend that I keep seeing, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a delay here on my slides. The other premium that I keep seeing over the last probably 6 to 8 months has been socks. I don't really know if this is in relation to the fact that people are at home. I got 7 packages in 6 months that all contained pairs of socks, and that was from outside of Production Solutions clients. So here's just a couple of examples. You'll notice, except for the first one, none of them are particularly mission oriented. The first one was from, I think, the SPCA, and so it was an animal related. I also don't know if they did male versus female versions. These all came to my name, so they were all women's socks. It'd be interesting to know if anyone did a male-female test on this. And then if one premium is great, multiple premiums is even better. So tote bags in particular, we tend to see a lot of tote bags where there's an offer of more than one. It might be 2 different sizes. It might be a set of matching ones. And then the other way we've seen multiple premiums happen, obviously, I think most of us have seen kitchen sink packages that have a ton of premiums in it. But we're also starting to see from a back-end premium side, this idea of choosing between premiums. So you'll see on the left, this was Humane Society and you had the choice of either a tote bag or a t-shirt. This is probably a great way to clean out your inventory if you've done back ends in the past and you have a bunch of premiums kind of left over. This could be a great way to get rid of some of them. But I also think it shows sort of an interesting idea behind letting people choose what they're going to get. So I know that was a lot. We're going to talk now a little bit about commercial mail. And I just have a couple of ideas that are happening in commercial mail that I think nonprofits should be paying more attention to. So the first thing I want to talk about is hyper-personalization. Commercial mailers have really invested a lot of money in their data and have really worked very hard to find out who their customers are and what it's going to take to get them to buy the next thing or invest in the next thing. And so what we see in the mail is that hyper-personalization has kind of become the norm amongst a lot of commercial mailers. So just a couple of examples here. The two at the top are both very regional. So we have first on the left is doctors. So this is a postcard where it basically says, here's 5 doctors located in your city, and it gives kind of approximate locations with a map. Next to that is actually RingCentral, which is a platform for businesses to use for phone. It's actually what PS uses. But what they've done with their postcard is they've personalized it to the industry that they're sending it to. So you'll notice it says, improve your medical practices communication with RingCentral. And then below it, the personalized Coke bottles, I think we've all seen those. Postcards where something is actually sent with their name on it, that's very, very popular. But they're also personalizing beyond the name. So it could be, in this case, they're using a birth date, but it could also be something they bought in the past. It could be a special offer specific to that person based on what they like. And then finally, the last one, this is a self-mailer where they talked about, so we've got personalization of the name, Dear James, activate your online finance account. Then we have what kind of car they had. And then at the bottom of that personalization is the area they live in. So you could be the cleanest car in Seven Oaks. So it's about layering all these personalization pieces together to make messaging that's specific to that consumer. And the way that most of them are doing it is through postcards and self-mailers. So this is just like a quick look at some of what is out there. If you are not using postcards and self-mailers more often, this may be a way to open up other mail avenues. So what's most interesting to me right now about the way that commercial mailers are using it is that businesses that you wouldn't expect to send direct mail are actually sending direct mail. So for instance, on the right side of the screen, these are all digital companies. This is Google, DoorDash, Amazon, Booking.com, and LinkedIn, and they are all using direct mail to reach customers. So think about it in terms of your digital programs. Are there places where it would make sense to mail some of your digital donors? And doing it through a postcard is a really inexpensive way to do that. The other thing that commercial mailers do a lot of is they choose one sort of high impact detail in their mailing. So because they don't have to send reply envelopes usually, and they're not usually worried about a reply slip, a lot of their mailings tend to be a bit simpler, especially those that are in envelopes. And so what they do is they choose one thing that's kind of grabs someone's attention. So for example, here we have a couple of window options. First is the dog-shaped window, which I thought was really cute. Below it, this is actually a credit card offer. It has a faux credit card inside. And those 3 small windows that kind of show you the peek into what's inside without showing you the whole card. Then we have scratch and sniff, The Capital One envelope there is embossed. That 60,000 bonus miles and the 2x miles, that's all embossed into the envelope. We have a metallic envelope. We have a postcard that uses a map, like a local map, to show like how close the person lives. And then the world just got bigger. That's actually a custom window on the back of an envelope, again, for a credit card company. So think about in terms of, is there one thing that you could put into a mailing that would bring attention? And it might be something inside and not something on the envelope. But this is something we see a lot in commercial mailers. And then the other thing that they tend to do is there's a ton of interactive elements. So we've seen this in nonprofits. Very often things like piggyback labels, where you peel a label off the envelope and put it on the reply form, or you peel it off of the letter and stick it on the reply form. That is popular. This kind of takes it a step further. So just a few of the examples, we have pull-out panels, so self-mailers that have panels that pull out and telescope out from the self-mailer. We have scratch-off, like you would do on a scratch-off lottery ticket. So the Liberty Mutual one actually has a panel that you can scratch off to show the damage to a car before an accident and after. We have mailers that can fold up into some shape once you have read them. And then in the top right, we have some kind of unique tear-offs on envelopes. So while we've seen some of these RIP features and envelopes in nonprofits, I think we see them a lot in commercial mailers, particularly for some reason, credit card companies. I think I see them a lot. I also see them in things like AAA, your warranty has expired, the mail version of that sort of spam phone call. So it is something that has become super popular amongst envelopes. And then I wanted to touch on a couple of things that are coming up in the mail. Now, these have existed. They're not brand new, but we haven't necessarily seen them used a lot in nonprofit mail at this point. And the first is augmented reality. So if you've never seen this before, this is essentially printing an image that when a cell phone is held up to it, it can actually animate the image. So here's a couple of examples. On the left is Spectrum, and they basically had a video message from someone. So the donor could, in this case, they had to download a special app to do it. And they would scan the image, and then the video would come up. If you look at the ones next to it, the post office in particular, so they pre-printed an image on their box, their priority mail box. You hold your phone up to it, I believe also using an app, and that image then comes to life and you get a message. In this case, it was all the image shows is 15 freezing awesome something, it's blank. So there was clearly some message they were getting across to users. Above that is a travel agency. So this is actually a foreign, I think this was in Britain, but it was showing these sort of snow-capped mountains, different places you could go. And when you held your phone up, there was an avalanche that showed on your phone of all these different places that you could go. The other idea that we have started to see now is voice-activated commands. So with a lot of people having access to either Alexa, Google Home, or even Siri on their phones, you are able to give through those. So there are donation programs set up where you could tell Alexa, you know, Alexa, donate to, just like the one we see here on the left. And then there's an example from commercial mail on the right. So this was a car dealership that was basically offering to give you the value of your car if you sold it to them. And so they offered 3 ways to do that. The first was to go to their website, or you could text them, or you could ask your Amazon Alexa or Google Voice to, quote, launch direct mail. And then it gave you a campaign ID and a PIN number to use. And that would launch the particular app that they had. So think about this in terms of your fundraising mail. This would be, from a print standpoint at least, a very low cost way to engage mobile users or those that are using these voice activated assistants. If you already have that program set up, include those commands in the mail. It's not going to cost you anything extra. It's just another option to give. And then the other place that we're starting to see a lot of innovation come in is really in green printing. Now, some of these are a little further off than others. A lot of these are already here. So Recyclebugs, like the ones in the bottom right corner, which show the percent of post-consumer waste that's used. Sustainable Forestry Initiative and the FSC, this is about chain of custody paper and understanding where the paper comes from and how sustainable it is. Soy Ink is a popular green initiative that mailers are already using. Landfill-free companies, we actually have a label printer that we work with that has gone landfill-free in the last couple of years. So that's something we're starting to hear from companies. The one I really want to kind of point out, which is very much on the horizon, but I don't know how long, is algae ink. So algae ink is sustainable, renewable, carbon negative. So basically, for every pound of algae ink that is used, 26 pounds of CO2 equivalent are captured. In other words, using a 45-pound bucket of algae ink is the same on the environment as planting 2 trees. So it is definitely emerging. It is being used in some applications currently. I believe there's some clothing that's being printed with it, as well as packaging, so like cardboard boxes. And I think, you know, as the technology continues to increase and move, we may see more and more of this become a real thing in commercial printing, which is good news. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about today are some cost-saving tricks and tips. And you know, printing is a very, print and mail in particular are very complicated in their pricing because there's a lot of moving parts to make direct mail happen. But I want to touch on a couple of things in particular. And the first thing I want to talk about is paper choices. So if you have been mailing the same thing over and over and over again, and you've never really thought about what paper you're using to do it, now may be the time. So we know that there's a very real possibility that we will have another postage increase later this year. We're just waiting on the final word from the post office. And we've been hearing about paper increases across the industry. So now's a good time to take a real hard look at what is it you're asking for. So this is just a couple of examples. So if you took a 60-pound uncoated stock and compared it to a 60-pound coated stock, and then drew it out across some different quantities, you can start to see that the difference between them can make a big difference in your budget. So at a small quantity, probably not going to see a ton of difference. So here we have a 60-pound uncoated stock versus a 60-pound coated stock. It's a 9% difference at 25,000 pieces. But once you move up to 500,000 pieces, that's a 31% difference per 1,000. So those differences, really looking at, do you need the coated stock? Is that really going to be the best option for the piece, for your budget? Is it going to change the way that donors see that piece? Is it worth testing? Those are the questions you should be asking as these increases start to happen. I also show here kind of the differences in recycled paper. So recycled paper currently is more expensive than unrecycled paper. And you can see the difference between no PCW, so no post-consumer waste recycling, versus 10% and versus 30%. What's interesting about this is if you are using recycled paper, the difference between 10% and 30% is fairly small, pennies. And so again, this is about asking questions, understanding what you're using, and do you really, are you choosing the best option for what you're doing, and how does that play into your budget? And it's worth testing to see if there's an option that would fit better. The other thing to point out around printing is there's almost always an alternative. Now, that's not 100% true, but almost always there's some sort of alternative. So this is just a couple of examples. So on the left, we have, this is a perf-out ornament that St. Jude's did a few years ago. That was not printed with foil. That is actually an ink. It's called liquid foil. And there's a supplier who can print that same metallic look. It looks like foil. I know it's hard to tell in the picture, but in person it looks like foil, but it's actually done with ink. And it's around 20% cheaper than foiling. Now, I don't know of any label makers that are using it, and a lot of people who are using foil are using it in labels. But to start asking those questions about, is there something else? Maybe it's moving to a metallic ink. Maybe there is a liquid foil that's coming for label makers. But to continue to have those conversations with your production people to say, what can I do? I still want this look, but what alternatives may there be? Next to that is another kind of price comparison. This is looking at colored paper. So the difference between a 60-pound text uncoated and a 60-pound canary yellow uncoated. Again, smaller quantities, probably won't notice the difference as much. It's about 10% difference. But when you start moving to higher quantities, the difference between yellow paper and white paper gets quite significant. At 500,000 pieces, it's 43% different. It's way more expensive to get yellow paper. And it also can at times be an issue of how easy it is to get the paper, and can you actually get the color paper that you really want. So below that are two envelopes. They look completely like colored envelopes, but in fact, these are done with a flood tint. So essentially, it is white paper that they have colored on one side to match the color that they wanted for the campaign. And that allowed them to do the other thing that you can do as an alternative, which is instead of buying a label and printing on it, they were able to just block out a white area, and that became their label. So that's another great way to kind of save money, is to say, okay, do we need to buy a label and print on it, or can we just print on the envelope directly? That's going to cut out affixing costs. It's going to cut out having to personalize two pieces, and you will be able to get the color you need and on a cheaper paper. Similarly, do you need a real one? So again, this is another example of the label. The Wilderness Society envelope here, that is not a real label, even though it looks like one. That is in fact just done with a flood tint. And then next to it, probably an old school technique, but this is showing faux pin feeds. So like you used to use on a dot matrix printer. But think about what your art looks like, and are there techniques where you don't have to use the real thing? So in this case, another option of that is you'll notice that the circle that's around the address block looks like it's done with blue ink. Obviously, you're not paying someone to sit down with blue ink and circle it. You're using an alternative. Just like these. So on the right are two examples of handwriting. So in the middle is a lift note that's done with a handwriting font. And then on the right, this is actually a font technique. where they take 3 different fonts and they mix them together so that it looks like a more natural handwriting. I've heard it called a couple of different things, My Font, realistic handwriting font. There's a couple of different names it's gone under, but the actual outcome of it is that you get a much more natural looking handwriting than you would in a normal handwriting font. There's slight irregularities that make it look like someone actually sat down and wrote it. And then on the left, we have what looks like an urgengram, but in fact is a control acquisition piece. So as long as you're not using any trademarked words, like I think urgentgram and airgram are both trademarked, you can make your package look like an urgentgram without paying for someone's trademark to use it. Now, what's great about most urgentgrams is that you get a really quick turnaround because they're meant for emergency mailings. But in a case like this, where you're just trying to draw attention to the mailing, you can do that by just replicating the idea behind it. Note cards are really popular, but do you actually need a folded note card? So if you're looking to cut money in your budget, think about going to a flat card instead. So here's a couple of examples. On the left is one from the Holocaust Museum. This is it looks exactly like a note card. It is sent in a note card format, but it is just a flat card instead of a fold over card. And then next to that, a slightly different size from Habitat for Humanity, where they have used just a flat card and a handwriting font to, instead of sending a lift note, a traditional letter, or a note card. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. My colleagues probably have a bit more to say about it than I do, but if you have not taken a look at your data hygiene and you're looking to cut budget, this might be the time. So is your data clean? Are you still mailing to addresses that are not valid? And there's some best practices here and some business rules around how things should be done. I urge you to take a look at the deck later and really kind of dive into some of these. But there's lots of ways in which your addresses could be cleaned up to make sure that you're not mailing more than you need to. A couple of quick postage ideas. So the first is, did you know that first class letters using a stamp actually cost more than first class letters using a meter? I know this is a technique. A lot of people don't like using the meter. They prefer a live stamp. But if you're really desperate, that is a 4-cent savings per piece currently. Now, when the new postage rates go into effect, we don't really know what will happen. But for now, it's worth looking at if you're sending a lot of first class mail, can you make this one change? And then also look at stamped reply envelopes. If you haven't considered sending a BRE, it might be worth testing, especially if you're doing a lot of stamped reply envelopes. The per piece cost for BREs is a little bit higher, but you're only paying for the ones that actually get sent back to you. And based on your quantity of mail over the year, that pricing changes. So if you are a high volume mailer, you may find that it's actually much closer to using a stamped reply envelope. Ganging is super popular and something that more people should be doing. So these images are actually from a calendar gang that PS does every year, where we offer up the opportunity to our clients as well as some outside clients to come in and do a big calendar gang. So if you work at an agency or you work for a place where maybe you're responsible for a couple of mailers, or even if you're at a nonprofit and you're looking at mail across several programs, finding ways to gang pieces together and have them all run at the same time will always bring some cost savings. Postal promotions. The one we talked about earlier was informed delivery. Registration for that is going to be starting in July, and then it will run through the end of November. that will bring up to 2% savings in your postage. So it's always worth it to go in and look to see what postal promotions you may be able to qualify for. There's some great explanations of them online. We've written about them on the PS blog, and you can certainly find more information through the Postal Service. This is the 6 that were offered this year, and with the dates that they're running. Variable data printing is the last thing I want to talk about. It's obviously a much bigger topic than I can talk about in a couple of minutes, and we are running long. But if you have not looked at VDP printing and digital printing, now is the time. This is a great way to lower some of your testing costs. The one thing that I will kind of say around it is you really can't judge it by its line item costs, so you really need to look at a budget as a whole. You don't print overs, you don't print more than you actually need, and you can take away a lot of plate cost and testing, as well as potentially some postage savings based on whether or not you are able to combine packages together. So here's a quick nonprofit example from Heifer International. This is 3 self-mailers that they did. I think there were 5 or 6 in the whole lot. They were all able to print at the same time, and you'll see they all have different images. They all have different text. They actually were able to specify based on what the donor gave. So if they bought chicks or a goat or a cow or bees, they got a different mailer depending on what they had actually given. So that is my very, I didn't realize how long we would run presentation. I hope there's something here.
We have some lightning round questions.
Okay.
On the faux stamps, is that just to catch your eye on the reply?
I believe it is, because there's no benefit to it from a postal standpoint.
Okay. Cost range on socks that you are seeing?
So we, I wish I had one. I can follow back up, but I don't really have one. Most of the packages I got were very involved packages that actually had 5 or 6 different premiums in it. So.
Okay, so Sarah will be back in touch on that one.
Yep.
We had a question about stats on responses from one type of mailing to another. Does, for example, changing the paper change the response rate?
I'm sure it can, but I would say it's worth testing, especially depending on what the change is. So if you're talking about an insert and you're going to change from an offset paper to a coated stock, I don't know that if your donors will notice it as much as you notice it. So it's worth the test.
Okay. And then what are some resources that there might be in the world for people to get this type of information ongoing?
So the best resources, there are a couple of paid services. So Who's Mailing What does this. They have a large website. It's mostly commercial mail, not nonprofits. We offer this information to our clients. I would say if you're working with an agency, you should be able to reach out to them. Also talk to your suppliers. Very often they are willing to send you samples of things they've seen. The more specific you are, the better, however, about what you're looking for. And obviously, we do this at PS all the time. I actually send out a monthly testing email that talks about different topics every single month.
So short version is best way is to become a Production Solutions client.
There you go. That's
my pitch a good way to end a webinar.
That's my pitch for today.
And then given that, okay, we had a question about whether the USPS shares any data on open rates for the informed delivery.
Yes, so if you, I know you can get it for your particular campaign. I don't know if they do it across the board, but you can get statistics for any campaign that you run. You just have to request them.
Okay, so no benchmarking, but you can find out how yours is doing.
Yeah, and I think the more we're using it, I think we will see the post office start to publish that, but I honestly don't know off the top of my head if they have.
Okay. And then a report from the field, someone said they got a pair of men's socks from Maker Mark whiskey, and so there's probably not a female select going on, at least for Maker's Mark.
Well, there you go.